The State Forestry Service pays you to be bored. That's the job, really. You sit in a 14 by 14 foot cab 70 feet above the tree line. You scan the horizon every 15 minutes, and you try not to lose your mind. I was 26, freshly out of a relationship I don't like talking about, and when I saw the posting I thought, perfect, exactly what I need. Solitude, purpose, somewhere nobody can reach me. Granite Peak Lookout, northern Idaho. The previous occupant had left a stack of paperbacks, a coffee-stained logbook going back to 1987, and a hand-drawn map of the surrounding trails tacked to the wall with a note that said, "Don't bother with the East Ridge after August." I figured that was about wildlife. Bears, maybe. I pinned the map back up and forgot about it. The first 3 weeks were genuinely wonderful. I watched lightning storms move across the valley like slow machinery. I learned the names of every visible peak. I radioed in 2 smoke sightings. Both turned out to be burn piles on private land, and felt the specific satisfaction of having done my job correctly. The loneliness I'd been afraid of never came. The quiet felt earned. I fell into a rhythm that I still think about when my current life feels too loud. Wake at 6, coffee, scan, log, breakfast, read until the heat of midday made the cab uncomfortable, then move out to the catwalk with water and sit in the shade of the roof overhang and watch the valley. Afternoon scan, dinner, evening scan, bed by 10. The simplicity of it felt almost spiritual. I understood for the first time why people chose this, not as escape, as clarification. I wrote letters, actual handwritten letters, because I'd brought stationery for reasons I couldn't fully explain, and the satellite phone was for emergencies, and the radio was for work. I wrote to my mother. I wrote to 2 friends. I wrote 1 letter to the person I'd left, or who'd left me, depending on the telling, and I didn't send it. I folded it inside the back cover of a novel I'd already finished and didn't think about it again for weeks. The first strange thing happened in late July. I'd been asleep maybe 2 hours when I woke up certain I'd heard a knock. Not on the door at the base of the tower, 70 feet below, at ground level, but on the glass, on the cab windows. 70 feet up, nothing around me but air. I sat up. The Osborne firefinder in the center of the room cast a faint shadow in the ambient starlight coming through the glass. Outside, the forest below was a black mass, no moon, and the sky was that particular dark that makes you feel the stars are very far away. I listened for maybe 10 minutes. The only sound was the faint creaking of the tower structure settling in the cold, a sound I'd gotten used to, a sound that had become almost companionable. Nothing else. Wind, maybe. I wrote it off and went back to sleep. It happened again 4 nights later, then twice in the same week. Each time, 2 knocks, deliberate, spaced about 3 seconds apart. Like someone waiting for an answer. Like someone who had done this before and understood the rhythm of it. I started examining the outside of the cab in daylight. The catwalk that runs around the outside of the cab was accessible, obviously. I walked it every morning. But there were no marks, no scratches on the glass, no sign anything had been up there. And the ladder to the cab, the one I pulled up each night out of old habit, a superstition the previous lookout had apparently practiced, based on a note tucked under the first rung. Always pull it, you'll thank yourself. Was always exactly where I'd left it, nothing disturbed. I told myself it was thermal expansion, the wood and steel contracting in the cold nights, the frame of the windows flexing. I wrote it in my personal notebook and underlined it, like that made it more true. Thermal expansion, normal for structures of this type, not concerning. What I didn't write, the smell. It started around the same time as the knocking, something faint but wrong. Not decomposition exactly, more like the underside of a wet log, but with something underneath that I can only describe as electric. Like the air before a lightning strike, that charged metallic quality that coats the back of your throat. It would appear without warning and vanish the same way, always at night, always without any corresponding change in weather, always in the cab despite every window being latched. I checked for rodents, I checked for moisture damage, I found nothing. Some nights it was strong enough that I'd move to the opposite side of the cab and sit there breathing through my mouth until it passed. Some nights it was barely there, just a suggestion, enough to make me uncertain whether I was actually smelling something or manufacturing it. That uncertainty was its own particular kind of unpleasant. The first week of August I hiked the East Ridge Trail. I know, the note said not to, but I'd been up there 70 feet for weeks, and I needed to feel ground under my feet and trees around me and the specific irrelevance of my own footsteps. So I went. The trail was fine for the first 2 miles. Old growth mostly, fir and larch, the kind of trees that have been there so long they feel structural, like they're holding the mountain up. The light came through in columns. I ate lunch on a rock overlooking a dry creek bed and listened to the nothing, which was good nothing. The normal kind, the kind that is actually just the accumulated small sounds of a living ecosystem. A woodpecker somewhere, wind moving through the canopy in long, slow waves. The creek bed dry, but not entirely silent, small things moving in the rocks. On the way back, I found the clearing. It wasn't on my hand-drawn map. It wasn't on the official trail maps I'd been given at orientation. It was maybe 40 feet across, perfectly circular, not naturally circular, the kind of deliberate, measured circular that puts a cold finger on the back of your neck. And the trees at its edge were all dead. Not fire dead, not beetle kill. Nothing I recognized from my orientation training. Just dead, standing upright, bark intact but dull, branches still attached. When I pressed my thumb against the wood of the nearest trunk, it was dry all the way through in a way that takes decades, maybe longer. The kind of dead that has been dead for a very long time. In the center of the clearing, the ground was darker, not scorched, just a different color, a deep brown that seemed to go further down than the surrounding soil, like looking into water you couldn't see the bottom of. I crouched at the edge of the clearing and looked at it for a long time without understanding why I didn't want to step in. The silence in that clearing was not the silence I'd had lunch in 20 minutes before. It had a different texture. That's the only way I can put it. The ambient sounds of the forest, all that accumulation of small living noise, simply stopped at the tree line. Inside the circle of dead trees there was nothing. Not peaceful, nothing. Applied nothing. Deliberate nothing. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat because there is nothing competing with it. I stood at the edge for maybe 5 minutes, long enough to notice a second thing. There were no tracks in the darker soil at center. No animal tracks, no bird prints, nothing. Whatever lived in this forest, and I'd seen deer, squirrels, a black bear at distance, any number of birds. Nothing came in here. Nothing landed here. I walked back to the tower faster than I'd walked anywhere in weeks and didn't let myself think about it, which is a skill I developed in childhood and have never been proud of. That night the knocking came 3 times, 3 pairs, evenly spaced, and after the 3rd pair, I heard something else. I have spent months since then trying to describe this accurately to myself, lying awake in my apartment with the city sounds outside providing no comfort. It was almost a voice, not a voice, but the shape of one. The syntactic architecture of language without any of the content. The rhythm of a sentence, the slight rise at the end that marks a question, the pause that expects an answer, all of that present, and underneath it, where meaning should have been, nothing, just the outline of communication with the interior completely hollow. I turned on every light in the cab. I sat in the metal folding chair with my back against the Osborne firefinder, and I watched all 4 walls of windows, and I did not sleep, and I thought very carefully about whether I was losing my mind. The conclusion I reached, sitting there in all that fluorescent light at 3 in the morning, was that I was not. That the sounds were real, that the clearing was real, that whatever these 2 things were, they were connected, and they were not interested in my opinion of them. In the morning, I radioed the district office. I said the isolation was getting to me. Could I request a welfare check? Just someone to drive the access road up to the base of the tower. They said sure, they'd send someone Thursday. Their tone was kind and not particularly concerned. I had the impression this was not the first such call they'd received from this tower. Thursday came. The ranger, a man named Cal, 50s, weathered in that specific Forestry Service way, economical with words in a manner that felt chosen rather than natural, climbed up and drank coffee with me and asked if I was eating enough. I said I was fine actually, just a rough patch. He looked around the cab with the unhurried attention of someone who had looked around a lot of lookout cabs, noted the neat logbook, said I was doing good work. On his way out, he paused at the top of the ladder and said, "You been up the East Ridge?" I said yes. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between concern and resignation. "Don't go back up there," he said. I asked why. He said, "Previous occupant went up there in his 3rd season, came back different." He paused and seemed to be choosing his next words with care. Stayed different, finished his rotation, filed his paperwork, drove home. His wife called us 6 weeks later, said he'd stopped talking. Not mute, he could talk, just stopped having anything to say. like whatever he'd heard up there had made regular conversation seem beside the point. He looked out at the tree line for a moment. Forest Service psychologist said it was a breakdown, delayed stress response from the isolation. Maybe. I've been doing this 22 years, and I've seen isolation do strange things to people, and I have another word for what happened to him, but I won't say it up here. He tapped the railing once. You call me if the sounds come back. He climbed down. I watched his truck until it disappeared around the first bend in the access road, trailing a thin cloud of dust. I noticed he hadn't asked me what sounds. That night the knocking didn't come. Neither did the night after. The rest of my rotation was professionally, flawlessly quiet. I called in 2 more smoke sightings, both confirmed this time. A genuine small fire, 3 ridges over that the aerial crews handled before it spread. I felt useful. I felt like myself. Whatever had been accumulating through July and early August seemed to simply withdraw, the way a tide goes out, and I was careful not to examine it too directly, in case examining it caused it to return. I wrote more letters. I finished the bad novels and started enjoying them, ironically. I watched the late summer light change the color of the valley by degrees, gold deepening to amber to something almost rust. I stopped pulling up the ladder at night, which felt like a statement I couldn't entirely justify. At the end of August, I climbed down, got in my car, drove to the nearest town, and ate a burger the size of my face, and called my sister, and talked for 2 hours about nothing important, and felt the specific relief of someone who has been holding their breath and finally stopped. I didn't go back the following summer. I told myself I was ready for something different. Here's what I haven't said yet. The part I've told exactly nobody. On my last morning, packing up the cab, consolidating the logbook entries and stripping the bunk, and leaving the place the way I'd found it, I went out on the catwalk for a final look at the valley. I do not regret this. The view was extraordinary, and I wanted to carry it with me. On the east-facing section of the catwalk, centered precisely on the railing, there was a flat stone, dark brown, the size of my palm, the same color as the soil at the center of the clearing. I had not put it there. The ladder had been pulled up all night. I was certain of this because I'd gone back to pulling it up in the final week without deciding to. Just found myself doing it each night out of something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite habit. I stood and looked at the stone for a while. Then I picked it up and dropped it into the trees below and watched it fall and did not look for where it landed. I have thought about that stone most days since, about what it means that something left it there, about whether it was a greeting or a record or something else entirely, a marking of some kind, the way you'd mark a place you intended to return to. I still dream about the clearing. I'm standing at the edge, and the silence is being pressed into me like a thumb against a bruise, and the ground at center is that deep brown that goes further down than ground should go, and I can feel something at the edges of my hearing, the architecture of a question in a language assembled from something other than words. In the dream, I never answer. I don't know what happens if I do. I suspect the not knowing is the point. I suspect whatever was in that clearing has been asking the same question for long enough that the answer barely matters anymore. That the asking is the thing, that it will still be asking long after every fire lookout on every ridge has fallen down and been reclaimed, and the trails have closed over, and there is no one left to pull a ladder up at night. I find that thought either very comforting or very terrible, depending on the day. My father worked on fire lookout rotations for 11 summers. I was a kid for most of them, which meant the whole thing had this mythological quality. Dad disappearing every June into the mountains, sending postcards with bad drawings of the view from whatever tower he was stationed at that year, coming home in September thinner and quieter and smelling like wood smoke for weeks. He never seemed unhappy about it. He seemed, if anything, more settled each time he came back, like the mountains were doing something for him that ordinary life couldn't. He died when I was 19, heart attack. Fast and medically unremarkable, the way people die when you haven't braced for it, when you still have years of mentally scheduled conversations and haven't started having the important ones yet. I was finishing my first year of college. I flew home and arranged things and went back to school and did what you do, which is continue, because the alternative isn't available. I'm 34 now. I teach high school history, which suits me in ways I couldn't have predicted at 19. I own a reliable car and a slightly unreliable houseplant I've had for 6 years and regard with something close to respect. I have not done anything impulsive in a very long time. I like my routine. I like knowing what comes next. So, I don't fully understand why, when I found the old photographs in my mother's basement last September, Mom finally clearing out the storage room, calling me to come help, I decided I needed to go to Harlow Point. The photos were in a shoebox with his Forestry Service ID cards and some folded maps and a pocket knife I remembered him carrying. In one photo, he was maybe 32, 33, younger than I am now, which hit me unexpectedly, standing on the catwalk of Harlow Point Lookout in a flannel shirt with his sleeves rolled up, squinting into the sun, smiling at whoever was holding the camera. The sky behind him was that specific high-altitude blue that seems to belong to a different atmosphere than the one you breathe at ground level. He looked completely at ease. He looked like someone exactly where he was supposed to be. I told myself it was closure, a pilgrimage of sorts. I told myself I'd hike in, see the tower, feel whatever I was going to feel, and come home. Probably it was something less dignified than closure, some formless need to stand where he'd stood, look at what he'd looked at, close some gap I hadn't known was open. Harlow Point isn't staffed anymore. Most lookouts aren't. The Forestry Service uses aerial surveillance now, and the old towers have been decommissioned, a few preserved as heritage sites, most simply left to age into the landscape. Harlow Point is the latter, accessible by an 8-mile trail that isn't maintained beyond the first 2 miles, not listed in any hiking guide I could find, technically visitable but not promoted. I found it on a heritage registry website with a 3-sentence description and one blurry photograph taken from too far away to see any detail. The photo was undated. I packed 3 days of supplies, filed a trip plan with a friend who knows the backcountry, told her where I was going, told her when to call for help if I hadn't checked in, and drove 5 hours north on a Wednesday in late September. The timing was not ideal. The light at that latitude in late September goes early, and the forest at that elevation stops feeling like a recreational space and starts feeling like what it actually is. Indifferent, enormous, operational in ways that have nothing to do with you. I understood this, and went anyway. The hike-in was beautiful in that specific melancholy way of late-season wilderness. The larch trees already going gold, the undergrowth thinned out, the trail soft with fallen needles. I was alone the entire way, which I'd expected and welcomed. My shoulders dropped somewhere around mile 4. That specific loosening you only get when you're genuinely far from everything that wants something from you. I ate an apple on a log and thought about my father doing the same walk 30 years ago with a pack much heavier than mine, and I felt close to him in a way I hadn't in years. Not sad, just close. The tower appeared through the last stand of trees around mile 7, and something moved in my chest that I wasn't prepared for. It was smaller than I'd imagined from the photograph. The cab at the top, the 4 steel legs, the staircase zigzagging upward, all of it a little diminished by time, little elderly. The white paint had surrendered completely, leaving the wood gray and fibrous. But the structure was sound, clearly, nothing leaning, nothing collapsed. And the cab windows I could see even from the base were intact. All 4 of them, unbroken. In a building abandoned for 15 years in a mountain environment, that struck me as unlikely enough to notice. I set up my tent at the base in the last good light, ate dinner on a flat rock, and sat for a long time in the cooling dark thinking about my father. About patience, the job required. The willingness to be still, to be small, to watch and report and intervene at a distance. I was never patient as a child, impatient in the specifically restless way of kids who need to know what's happening around the next corner before they've finished with the current one. I'm better now, but I wondered sometimes whether if I'd been more patient, I'd have asked him more questions while I had him, whether there were things he'd have told me, given the right conversation on the right evening. I climbed the stairs at dusk to catch the last of the light from the catwalk. The stairs held. Each step was tested before I trusted it. They were solid in a way that surprised me. Someone had maintained them more recently than the rest of the structure suggested, or the wood had simply been very good to begin with. At the top, the view was everything the photograph had promised. The valley below, going blue-gray in the dusk, the peaks to the north still catching a thin line of orange, the forest stretching in every direction to the visible horizon. My father had sat up here and watched this for 3 summers. I stood on the catwalk and tried to inhabit that, tried to feel what he'd felt. The door to the cab was unlocked, not broken open, unlatched, as if someone had left it slightly ajar and the latch had simply disengaged. I pushed it open and stood in the doorway. Inside, dust on every surface, a broken folding chair on its side, a rusted stovepipe disconnected at the ceiling joint, the Osborne firefinder still bolted to the center floor. I hadn't expected that. Had assumed everything useful would have been stripped, and bird droppings along the north windowsill. A smell of old wood and something faintly metallic. The light from the windows is barely enough to see by. The logbook was sitting on the north windowsill. It shouldn't have survived 15 years of temperature variance and mountain moisture. Paper doesn't do that. But it had. The cover swollen and warped, the spine cracked when I picked it up, but the pages inside legible. Browned at the edges, the ink faded to a gray-brown, but legible. I found my father's entries in less than a minute. I knew his handwriting before I saw his name. That small, neat, evenly pressured print he used for anything official. The handwriting of someone who'd been taught that legibility was a form of respect for the reader. He'd done 3 rotations at Harlow Point. I'd known this from family stories. His entries across all 3 seasons were professional and precise. Smoke sightings logged with coordinates and times. Weather readings taken every 3 hours. Visitor sign-ins on the days the access road was open. Equipment status notes. And then, on the final page of his final rotation, September 9th, the year before he died, a different kind of entry. Sounds from the tree line again. 0200 hours. 3rd time this week. Not logging formally. Insufficient evidence, and I won't flag for psych review this close to end of rotation. Best description, not a voice. The shape of one. The way speech organizes itself in the moment before words arrive. The first time I heard it, I thought I was dreaming. I don't think that anymore. I heard something like this once before. I was 7 years old in my grandfather's house the night he died. I was in the back bedroom, and I heard something from downstairs that had that same quality. The shape of language with nothing inside it. I have not thought of that night in 30 years until this week. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means anything. What I know is that whatever is down there is aware of this tower. I have the feeling, which I can't justify and won't try to, that it has been here longer than the tower and will be here after. Rotation ends Thursday. I'm going home to my family. I stood in the failing light of the lookout cab and read the entry 3 times. My father had heard it. He had heard it and recognized it as something he'd encountered before, in his grandfather's house, the night of a death. And he had gone home and never said a word, not once. Not in the months between that September and the spring when he died. Not in any of the years he'd had or that we'd had together. I thought about what that meant. That he had heard something that connected itself, in his own mind, to death. To his grandfather's death. And he had chosen to carry it alone. Whether to protect me, or protect himself, or because it was simply the kind of thing that couldn't survive translation into ordinary conversation, I didn't know. I still don't. I climbed down and got into my tent and lay there in the dark, listening to the forest. The forest was normal for a long time. Wind, the settling sounds of temperature dropping, an owl somewhere northeast, intermittent. I wasn't afraid. I was unsettled in a way that felt appropriate. That felt like the correct emotional response to finding out your dead father knew something he chose not to tell you, and I lay with that and let it be what it was. At 2 a.m., I heard it. I won't say it was close to a voice. I'll say it was exactly what my father described. The shape of speech without its contents. The syntactic structure of a sentence. The rhythmic pattern of language. The interrogative rise at the end that expects response. 4 seconds, maybe 5. From the tree line to the north. Then silence. The silence that followed felt different from the silence before, more complete, like the sound had used something up. I did not unzip the tent. This wasn't cowardice, or not only. It was that I felt, with clarity, that I haven't been able to shake since, that responding was a choice with consequences I couldn't calculate. That looking was a form of answering. My father had heard it and had not answered and had gone home and had, despite everything, more months with his family, more Septembers, more postcards with bad drawings. And I thought about that. The sound came once more around 3 a.m., shorter, a fragment, almost abbreviated, as if whatever was asking had somewhere else to be or had already made its point. Then nothing until morning. I broke camp in the first gray light and hiked out. I didn't look back at the tower. I don't know why. It felt important not to. Here's what I've been sitting with since I got home. My father heard it. He recognized it as something he'd heard before, at a moment of death. He wrote it down in a logbook he left in an unlocked cab in an unmaintained tower at the end of an 8-mile trail where the only person likely to find it was someone who specifically came looking. I don't think that was accidental. I think he left it for me. I think he knew, or suspected, that one day I'd need to do the same walk he did, would feel the same pull, and he left what he knew where I'd find it. Not as warning. He would have mailed a warning, as preparation, as the conversation we never had because he died before we got there. Some nights now, in my apartment, in the space between waking and sleeping, I hear something at the edge of my hearing. The shape of a question. Faint, patient, not threatening exactly, just present in the way old things are present, occupying their place without apology, waiting with the equanimity of something that has never had reason to hurry. My father heard it. His grandfather, maybe, heard it too. I don't know what it wants. I'm not sure want is the right category. I think it might simply be what the dark sounds like when it's paying attention. I left it unanswered, for now. Okay, so first I want to be upfront that I was not, when this happened, someone you'd describe as particularly outdoorsy. I was 22. I'd done exactly 2 backpacking trips, both guided, both with people who knew what they were doing and let me follow along feeling competent by association. I'd applied for the fire lookout position because I'd seen an article online, one of those "this forgotten job will change your life" pieces, and I was in that particular post-graduation limbo where your life feels like a rough draft and you think a dramatic change of scenery will force the revision. I was that specific kind of 22. I know this now. The posting was for McKenzie Ridge Fire Lookout, which is in a part of northern British Columbia that I would describe only as, if you broke down on the access road, you would be dead before anyone found you. I understood this in the abstract when I signed the paperwork. The first time the supply truck drove away, and I stood alone at the base of the tower listening to the engine sound fade into the mountains and then the silence close over where it had been. That was when I understood it as a physical fact in my body. But I stayed. Partly stubbornness, partly the knowledge that radioing to quit on day 1 would follow me professionally in ways I didn't want to deal with. And after the first 10 days, which were genuinely hard in ways I hadn't prepared for the scale of the silence, the way night came so fully dark that your own hands disappeared, I found my footing. You discover alone at that altitude that you are a more resourceful person than your daily life requires you to be. You solve small problems. You develop systems. You notice things. I noticed the way the morning light hit the valley in a different configuration each day as the season moved. I noticed the specific vocabulary of the wind, what gusts meant incoming weather versus what was just the mountain breathing. I noticed the birds, which species came to the railing, which kept to the tree line, which seemed to regard me with something that felt almost like recognition. One of them, a Clark's nutcracker who visited the north railing most mornings, I called Gerald. I am not embarrassed about this. Gerald was reliable, and I appreciated that. By week 3, I had a genuine rhythm. The scanning, the logging, the radio check-ins at prescribed intervals, the evening meals I'd got reasonably good at constructing from the shelf-stable supplies, the reading, the journaling, which started as an exercise in self-improvement and became something more honest and therefore more useful. I wrote things in that journal I'd never said to anyone. The isolation was functioning as intended, burning something off, clarifying something. I noticed the figure on night 19. I want to be precise about this because the precision matters. I was not in an anxious state. I was not sleep-deprived, not sick, not at any point in the previous days that I'd cataloged as concerning in my journal. I was doing a final pre-sleep scan at approximately 11 p.m., half moon giving decent visibility, the valley and ridgeline clear. I swung the binoculars northwest along the tree line in the routine arc I'd completed every night for 19 nights. There was something standing at the edge of the forest, at the point where the trees gave way to the rocky open slope that ran down to the base of my tower. My first thought was bear, immediate, confident bear, except it was standing upright, and it was. This is where language starts to fail me, and I need you to understand I've spent considerable time trying to find better words. It was person-shaped in the broadest sense, which is to say, it had the right number of vertical and horizontal axes, the right general suggestion of limbs arranged in the expected configuration, but the proportions were wrong in ways I couldn't isolate cleanly, too tall. The limbs plausibly the right number, but not plausibly the right lengths. The overall impression of something that had studied the general concept and reproduced it without access to a specific example. I had the binoculars on it for perhaps 15 seconds. Then I moved the field of view reflexively to check my bearing. The habit of a lookout, always cross-reference your position. And when I returned to the spot, it was gone. No movement visible, simply absent. Bear, I wrote in my personal journal. Standing upright. Possible injury affecting posture. Gone before I could get a better look. Not logging officially. Insufficient detail to justify. Night 20. Same spot, same time, within a few minutes. Standing. Gone within a minute of my noticing. Night 21. Same spot, same time. This time, I had the binoculars already positioned, had been waiting since 10:30. I kept them on the figure without looking away. It stood at the tree line for 8 minutes and 12 seconds. I watched the clock, and then moved back into the forest. Its movement was wrong in the same way its proportions were wrong. Not obviously, floridly wrong. Wrong in the way a word looks wrong when you stare at it too long, even though you've spelled it correctly. Like watching something translate itself from one medium into another in real time. Motion not quite native. I called my friend Devin that night. Devin is sensible and not prone to drama and has good instincts about when I'm overreacting versus when I'm identifying something real. I told her there was something on the tree line each night. She asked if I felt threatened. I thought about the question genuinely and answered honestly, no, not yet. It was just standing there. Devin said to tell my forestry contact if it continued, said it was probably a bear, said I should get more sleep. I didn't tell her about the proportions. I wasn't ready to say that part out loud yet. Night 22, 23, 24. The same. Same coordinates. Same time. 8 to 15 minutes of standing. Withdrawal back into the tree line. I began to document it properly in my personal journal. Time of appearance, duration, any variation in behavior. I noted that on night 23, it had appeared to turn its head at some point during the 8 minutes, the way you'd look up and down at the length of something you were assessing. I noted that Gerald, the nutcracker, had not appeared at the railing on any of the mornings following the night when the figure appeared. I noted that on night 24, for the first time, I had the feeling, unverifiable, not something I would report on a radio, that it was aware of me watching it, that the standing was not incidental, that the standing was for me. I got almost used to it, which sounds insane, but is simply what humans do with repeated stimulus. We habituate, we contextualize, we find the new thing's place in the pattern of ordinary things, even when it doesn't fit. By night 24, I was watching it with the focused but relatively calm attention of someone observing a phenomenon they don't understand but have provisionally filed as stable. This was not wisdom. This was adaptation to doing its job in the absence of better information. At night 25, I was at the binoculars by 10:40, scanning the northwest tree line, waiting. The figure didn't appear at the tree line. I swept the binoculars across the full northwest quadrant. Nothing. Checked south, east, west. Nothing. 10 minutes went by. 15. I thought, it's not coming tonight. I thought, maybe it's over. Whatever it was. Then I heard movement on the rocky slope below the tower. Close. Not at the tree line. Not at the base of the slope. Close. Directly below. I looked down over the railing. It was at the base of the tower ladder. I need to describe this carefully, and I need you to believe that I am not embellished because this account is the truest thing I have written since the journal I kept that summer. It was standing at the base of the ladder 70 feet below me, and I could see it without the binoculars because proximity replaced the need for magnification, and what I saw was tall, too tall, the height of something that had not been designed with door frames in mind. The limb geometry I'd sensed in the binoculars was now simply visible, arms that articulated somewhere in the middle in a way that wasn't a standard elbow, legs that suggested joints arranged in a slightly different priority order than I was accustomed to. The surface of it in the moonlight was not exactly skin, and not exactly bark, and not exactly either of those things. Something that did what those things do, protect and contain, but arrived at the solution differently, and its head was tilted up. It was looking at me. I did not move. This was not courage. It was the specific paralysis of an animal who has just understood that it has been seen and is working through the implications. We stayed like that at the base, me at the railing, 70 feet of night air between us, for what my watch later told me was 18 minutes, though it is the clearest example in my life of time losing its normal conversion rate. Those 18 minutes were both very fast and interminable, both too long and not long enough. During that time I experienced the following, in rough order: terror, a strange secondary calm beneath the terror, like a floor beneath a very high ceiling, the specific clarity of thought that comes when your brain decides that processing is more useful than panic, and something I can only call, though I resisted this word for years, recognition. Not that I knew what it was, But that on some pre-rational level, some level below language and below reasoning, I understood that this thing and I had been in the process of approaching each other for 25 nights, and that this moment was the completion of something that had been set in motion before I arrived. After 18 minutes it turned and walked back toward the tree line. Not slowly, not quickly, at a pace that suggested neither urgency nor indifference, but something in between that I don't have a word for, something with its own internal rhythm. At the edge of the tree line it stopped, turned back, looked at me, did whatever it was that registered in my body and mind as looked at me, for perhaps 10 seconds. Then it was gone. The tree line was a tree line again. The forest was a forest. The silence that followed was regular silence, the normal accumulated quiet of a mountain at 1 a.m, and the contrast with what had just ended made it feel almost shockingly ordinary. It did not come back, not the following night or any night after. Gerald returned to the railing in the morning and regarded me with his usual air of detached assessment, and I found this disproportionately comforting. I finished the rotation without further incident. I did not report any of it. I wrote it all in the journal in as much detail as I could manage while it was still fresh, and then I closed the journal and packed it in my bag and carried it out of the mountains with me. I'm 29 now. I work in logistics. I have a partner who knows I spent a summer in a fire lookout and knows something happened there that I don't fully talk about. He's patient with it. He's patient in general, which is something I think I sought out without fully knowing why. Here's the thing I've turned over the most in the years since. That figure was at the tree line on night 1, half a mile from the base of my tower, and each night it was closer. Not randomly closer, measurably, incrementally closer, at a consistent rate. I went back over my journal notes after I got home, and I mapped it. It walked approximately 100 feet closer per night. At that rate, starting where it started, it would reach the base of my tower in exactly 25 nights. It knew that. Whatever it was, it knew the geometry of its own approach. It had calculated the arrival. And on the night of its arrival, it looked up at me, and then it left. I've spent years trying to determine what those two facts mean in combination, whether the arrival was the point, the destination, and the leaving was simply what came after, whether it came to see me or to be seen by me, and whether those are even different things, whether the looking up was examination or acknowledgement or something else that I don't have the correct category for, because I am a 29-year-old logistics coordinator from Vancouver, and my conceptual vocabulary was built for a different range of phenomena. Some nights I stand at my apartment window at 11 p.m. I look down at the street, normal light, people and cars doing what people and cars do. I stand there for a few minutes, and I check the corners and the edges where the light runs out. Just looking. The way a lookout looks. Calm, methodical, waiting to see if anything needs to be reported. Nothing ever does, but some nights the waiting feels less like a habit I developed and more like something that was installed. Like somewhere on a mountain in northern British Columbia, 70 feet up in the dark, something looked at me for 18 minutes and left something behind when it left. Not a threat, not a curse, just an awareness of how distance closes, of how patiently, of how the thing moving toward you has always known exactly how many nights it will take to arrive.